they say World War III is something that belongs to history books, something that happened in the past, not something we would ever witness again. But today, that belief is being tested in real time. Because right now, Iran and the United States are not just exchanging warnings. They are moving closer to a point where miscalculation, one strike, one decision, could change the course of global history. Military deployments are increasing. Diplomatic trust is collapsing. And behind closed doors, nations are preparing for outcomes they hope never arrive. This is no longer just a regional tension in the Middle East. It is a global pressure system building up silently, where oil markets react before politicians speak, where alliances are tested before wars are declared, and where one wrong move could pull multiple superpowers into a chain reaction no one can fully control. And the most dangerous part is this. History has shown us that world wars do not begin with announcements. They begin with escalation that everyone believes is still containable until it isn't. Today, the world is not asking if tension is rising. The real question is, how close is the breaking point? Deterrence only. It works when both sides believe the other side is rational, predictable, and ultimately afraid of consequences. But something changes in the human mind, especially in leadership psychology, when fear starts to replace trust. What was once a strategy to prevent war slowly begins to look like preparation for it. Military positioning increases, not because war is declared, but because no one wants to be the first to look weak. And in that space, masculinity at a national level begins to mirror masculinity at a personal level. The pressure to appear strong even when uncertainty is rising underneath. Men in moments like this often interpret silence as danger and hesitation as weakness. That psychological wiring built around protection, control, and dominance doesn't disappear in global politics. It scales up. Leaders start thinking in terms of reputation, legacy, and credibility. Meanwhile, from a broader human perspective, women and civilians often see the same movements differently, not as strength, but as instability building too fast to contain. Two interpretations of the same reality begin to form, both valid, both incomplete. And in that gap between perception and intent, deterrence stops being a shield and starts behaving like a countdown nobody officially started. The moment dialogue is replaced by military signals is rarely announced, it is felt. It happens quietly when words no longer carry the weight they used to, and actions start speaking louder than negotiations. In international conflict, especially between powers like Iran and the United States, conversations do not always end with agreement. Sometimes they end with repositioning. Ships move, bases adjust readiness. Airspace is monitored differently. And suddenly, communication is no longer about understanding, it becomes about signaling capability. Men in leadership roles, shaped by psychological conditioning around responsibility, control, and protection, often begin to interpret diplomacy through a lens of strength rather than empathy. The fear is not just war, it is appearing weak in front of an adversary who might exploit hesitation. That mindset transforms dialogue into strategy and strategy into posture. At the same time, from a human and societal perspective, women and families watching from outside often sense something different. They do not see strength in silence or movement, they see distance. Ants growing where communication used to exist. As words fade and signals increase, the emotional temperature rises even when no one officially declares escalation. Because when communication stops being about resolution and starts becoming about positioning, the world doesn't feel like it is being discussed anymore, it feels like it is being prepared. One miscalculation is never just a single mistake in a high-stakes geopolitical environment, it is a chain reaction waiting for the smallest push. In moments where Iran and the United States stand close to confrontation, decisions are no longer made in calm environments. They are made under pressure, uncertainty, and the weight of reputation. A radar reading misinterpreted, a response delayed by seconds, or a strike perceived as intentional instead of defensive can shift everything. And in that space, the system does not pause to correct itself, it reacts. Men in command positions often carry an intense psychological burden. The need to respond decisively, to not appear hesitant when hesitation could be interpreted as vulnerability. That mindset, rooted in protection and authority, can compress decision-making time until instinct replaces our eyes' reflection. From a broader human perspective, women and civilian observers often process these moments differently. They are not analyzing tactical advantage, they are sensing fragility in systems that feel too large to control, where human emotion and technological precision are dangerously intertwined. And in that intersection between pressure and perception, one wrong interpretation is no longer isolated. It becomes a trigger point. Because in global conflict dynamics, chaos is rarely planned, it is activated when certainty disappears faster than judgment can recover. The world consistently underestimates escalation timelines because it assumes war behaves like logic, when in reality it behaves like human psychology under pressure. Nations rarely move from peace to conflict in a straight line. Instead, they move through invisible stages of tension, suspicion, positioning, reaction, and finally, irreversible momentum. And the mistake most observers make is believing there is always enough time between each stage to correct course. History repeatedly proves otherwise. Men in leadership and military decision-making roles often operate under a psychological framework built on urgency, responsibility, and the fear of appearing weak in critical moments. That internal pressure shortens perceived timelines. What looks like time to negotiate from the outside can feel like time is running out from the inside. Decisions accelerate not because leaders want war, but because they want control over uncertainty. And control in moments of escalation becomes more valuable than patience. From a broader human perspective, women and civilians often interpret the same developments through continuity rather than compression. They expect dialogue to stretch, diplomacy to absorb pressure, and systems to naturally slow down escalation. But global conflict does not always respect that expectation. Instead, it tightens like a closing loop, where each response arrives faster than the last until the space for reversal quietly disappears without announcement. The Strait of Hormuz becomes the psychological and strategic point where men's decisions under pressure collide with women's fear of global instability. When superpowers stop talking and start reacting, the entire structure of global stability shifts from intention to instinct. Communication is no longer used to shape outcome, or it is used to justify positions already taken. In that shift, diplomacy does not disappear, but it loses its influence over direction. What replaces it is reaction, faster, sharper, and increasingly driven by perception rather than patience. Every move is now interpreted as a response to the last move, not a step toward resolution. Men in strategic and military leadership roles often experience this phase through a deeply ingrained psychological lens of responsibility and control. The pressure is no longer just external, it becomes internal. To hesitate feels dangerous. To delay feels like surrendering initiative. So reactions accelerate, decisions compress. And what might have once been a measured conversation becomes a sequence of calculated responses designed to avoid vulnerability at all costs. Strength in this context is not just capability, it is the appearance of certainty in an uncertain environment. From a broader human perspective, women and civilians watching these developments often interpret the same shift in a completely different emotional framework. They do not see strategy evolving, they see communication disappearing. Where there was once dialogue, there is now silence filled with movement. Where there was once explanation, there is now interpretation. An interpretation without communication breeds anxiety because people begin to fill the gaps with their worst possible assumptions. And in that widening gap between reaction and understanding, superpowers are no longer shaping the narrative through words. They are shaping it through response time, posture, and readiness. When reaction replaces dialogue, the world does not feel like it is being guided anymore. It feels like it is being pulled forward by forces no one is fully explaining.